I think we should remain dissatisfied with our preaching so that we are always motivated to grow in our preaching. But I think there's a difference between being dissatisfied and being discouraged. For me, when I'm discouraged, normally that reveals the presence of pride, that to some degree in my preaching I was attempting to impress rather than serve. And so that distinction has helped me, as well as not seeking to evaluate based on any subjective impression I have, but obviously trusting the content of the gospel, as well as the mysterious work of the Spirit, for there are times when I'm preaching where it does feel, and I can sense, and I am made aware, or so it seems, of what is taking place. And there are other times where I am not brought into that awareness, and I must endure and trust, even though my preference is the former and not the latter.
Well, there are times, that we want to do things for the wrong reasons, but I think we should want to preach well.
Absolutely.
That should be a desire. Yeah. After every sermon on every Sunday morning, we recess, and with the head of the choir, and I get to the back of the church. Vesta's standing there, and I'll say, "How'd it go?" And if she says fine, I know I laid an egg. That's her polite way of saying it wasn't one of your best, dear. It's all right. Fine.
Spurgeon had that statement where he says, if I were forbidden to enter heaven but could choose an alternative state, I would choose as I have felt sometimes in preaching the gospel.
Yes.
And I think any preacher knows what he means by that. I can so easily think of times when I just feel like I've blown it completely. I remember this one brother asked me to preach at his father's funeral because the church then had a liberal minister, and he was scared the gospel would not be preached. So he asked me if I would go over to another local church and preach at his dad's funeral. And I just did a horrible job. I don't think the gospel, I mean, perhaps the Holy Spirit could have saved someone through hearing that sermon, but I'm not even sure of that. I mean, it was just, there was, I don't know if I did anything right in that sermon except maybe read the passage, So I definitely have experiences like that in preaching. I think when it's in my own congregation, though, by God's grace, I have a series of years of ministry there, and I have a confidence in God's work and labor in that place through the preached word, that when I'm in a setting like this, or Southern's Chapel on Tuesday, is that just yesterday? Oh my goodness.
Believe it or not.
Just yesterday, it's just very different, because we were talking about this a little bit at the break. So at Southern's Chapel, I was preaching from the Vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. Loved doing that. It was great fun, edifying for me, regardless of whether or not it was for anybody else. This talk earlier today here for me just felt laborious, thick. I'm trying to say a ton of stuff. But I think I've been preaching long enough to realize that, you don't judge it based on that. You do your best. You put out the gospel and the things you're saying with it from the Word, and then you pray, leave it to the Lord, and as R.C. said, you just get ready for the next one.
I don't think anybody out here would have known you were laboring through that message, so we would not have perceived that. And also, you guys,
you weren't sweating.
You really
I was.
You transcend this category in many ways. I was with a friend recently, and we were at a conference where John Piper spoke, and after the meeting, we were making our way back to the hotel, and the friend said, I am so tired, and I was having difficulty concentrating because I am so tired, and I realized that he had a category when it came to listening to John, and it would apply to all of you, that if he wasn't perceiving or benefiting from the message, it always had to be that he was tired. That is the only possible reason. It couldn't possibly be that any of you men possibly weren't as effective as you possibly could have been. And I thought, that's a cool status. You guys are breathing rarefied air, and I envy you. Yes.
I've often had this come to mind. I read a biography not too long ago of Eric Liddell, the runner. And the famous line he said, I run to feel God's pleasure. Well, he did a whole lot of running when he didn't feel that pleasure yet. And he had to keep running until he did. And, I think that fits ministry as a whole.
Yeah.
But maybe even almost like Pilgrim's Progress, something of an allegory of the Christian life. You got to keep running so long as you're doing the right things, and then you will feel God's pleasure.
Who's Eric Liddell?
The
Chariots of Fire.
Chariots of Fire, the Olympic runner from the 1920s. Missionary martyr as well. Martyr for the Christian faith under Japanese occupation in
I
China.
knew very well who he was. I was just so taken aback that you used the Sports Illustrated.
Well,
there.
fair enough.
That's true. It's true.
I couldn't resist that.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to say, and I deserve that. I deserve that. I didn't
No,
ask.
but you have been reading. I've sent you a number of John Feinstein books. You've been reading those, and that's what's discouraging for me. Once he reads these books, then that photographic memory goes to work. So then the next time I'm with Al, he's asking me specifics about the book or informing me about the book that I sent him, and he obviously knows more than I do about the very book, even in the world of sport.
Not hardly, but
you do have your limitations. You didn't get the Liddell quote right, so.
all right. It got the gist of it.
You got the gist of that.
It was the message version of the quote.
Yeah. It's when just for future reference, it's when I run, I feel his pleasure.
Well,
not
yes,
I
but
run
if you
to
read
feel
the
his
biography, he
pleasure,
said it more than
which
one way.
would
That's
be
right.
legalism, I think.
This really is what our conversations are like
That's
in the
right.
hotel room after the talks.
I got to say this. What I thought struck me more than anything at the end of your message is it made me want to go talk to someone about Jesus. Because the way you ended it, I just felt like, all right, somebody needs to hear this. I just want to tell you, the Lord really convicted me that way in your sermon. And I can't think of a better thing to pray for from a sermon, something like that.